Well, good evening, everyone. I don't know how many people are in the room, but I want to thank Jeff for setting up. We've been making a few trials over yesterday and today, and with some difficulties, both him and myself. We don't know how to navigate this Zoom very well. But anyway, I think we got it. And thank you, Christy, for the invitation as well. Just a quick question, how many people are in the room?
About 40.
All right. All right, let's start. It's past 10 o'clock for me. I woke up this morning at 6, so it's a little late. But I'm gonna try not to fall asleep, so you should try to do the same. So I've been asked to talk on bromeliads in Peru, and as many of you know, I guide botanical tours on many places, and Peru is one of the countries in South America where I've been back, I think, 4 or 5 times. It's a great country because it combines very well bromeliads and cactus. And so, besides the vegetation of Peru, it's a very interesting country from the archaeological and cultural point of view, with Machu Picchu, with the Incas, and all the good stuff. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start with a presentation. I always like to start with a little bit of geography so people know pretty much where we are. Ecuador is a country that is on the Pacific coast in South America. It is, you can see, can you see my cursor? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask before.
Yes.
Okay, so it is on the Pacific side in South America. It is crossed by the Andes, as you can see here. The population is about 32 million, and 1/3 of the population is concentrated around the capital city of Lima. The official language is Spanish, as most countries in South America. However, there are several indigenous languages still spoken, like Quechua, which is mainly from the Incas, and Aymara around Lake Titicaca. For the country natural resources, it's very rich in mineral resources, gold, copper, and oil, but it's also very good on the fisheries because of on the Pacific Ocean. It's cold water, and it's sometimes with the interaction with hot water or with warm water from the north, it creates a very good fishing environment. And I like to point out a little bit of the ecosystems of Peru. You can see in the yellow, all along the coast is what they call costa. It is one of the driest places on the continent, and in fact, in one of the driest places on Earth. I'm sorry about that. A very little vegetation grows here, and the rainfall is very rare. So it's mostly cloud and mist coming from the ocean, normally in the winter months. Then the Sierra, which is in a light brown, is basically the Andes. And the Andes extend the whole length of the country from north to south. And usually there's like 2 or 3 ranges. So this is not just the highest point. There's like valleys in between. And that was the very fertile valleys where population established themselves, especially in the past. And then the selva, it is pretty much half of the country is in the Amazon. So you can see there's a very, very few towns or population established there. And it's fairly pristine, it's fairly untouched, as differently than in other countries where the Amazon has been more influenced by the human activities. So again, as you can see, the terrain features on the western side, the coastal plains. Then you have the Andes, so you can see the elevation here. And then on the eastern part of the country is Amazon, which is very, very low elevation. And that's what the habitat will be, I'm sorry, the selva. I don't know what is going like this. I'm sorry about that. All right, for climate, you have very tropical in the eastern part of the country. As you can see, it's on the Amazon part is very, very wet and very humid. It is very dry in the west. And the most, like I said before, the most the temperate part of the Andes in the valleys is where most of the population is living, and it's the most active from human activities. The highest elevation in the country is the Huascaran Mountains, which is over 20,000 feet high, and is around this area. We're gonna see a few pictures of it later on the talk. So this is just to guide you where we're gonna be going. So we basically we start from the very north part of the country in Chiclayo, and I'm sorry, I don't know why it's doing this. And then we're gonna be crossing the Andes once into the Amazon. We're coming back to Trujillo, so we come back and crossing the Andes. Then we go along the coast. We go back again into the high mountains over here in the Huascaran. We come back to Lima. We drive south, and then we cross again the Andes, going into Cusco. Like I mentioned before, one of the good things about Peru is that it's very, very rich, not only from the Incas, but also other cultures that inhabit the country. And there is one discovery that was done fairly recently in the 1990s. It was the discovery of this civilization that preceded the Incas. And there is an incredible museum that is comparable. Many archaeologists compare it to the findings in Egypt of Tutankhamun, and they're still coming up with new discoveries. And they discovered what they call the civilization of Sipan. The main tomb was that of the Lord of Sipan. This is a reproduction of it that you can visit on the actual place where the tombs were found. But they have established a museum that is a very well known museum, where they have exposed all the findings from this civilization. Anyway, this is just a cultural thing that we usually do before the beginning of the trip, and just to give an introduction to Peru. The northern part of the country is very dry, as you can see here. There's a deciduous population, and of course you're going to see some cactus, espostoa in this case, Erythrina edulis. And again, you can see on the background how dry the environment is. They do have a rainy season, but it's in general very, very dry, which is very good for the habitat for cacti. Some of the melocactus that grow over here, very unique. There's literally like 2 species of melocactus in Peru. In the northern part, you find Melocactus villavistensis. In the southern part, you'll find Melocactus peruvianus. One interesting Bromelia that we found over here, and this was actually pointed out to me, I didn't even know that this was here, Tillandsia hildi. This plant is about 2 or 3 feet tall, so it's quite big. It doesn't look like a typical Tillandsia, but anyway, this is the habitat for it, and this is the type location for it, northern Peru, Tillandsia hildi. Deuteroconia longipetala, it's a very widespread bromelia in South America. They grow in Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, and I think in Ecuador as well. So it's very widespread. It's quite variable, but it's a common plant in South America. This is another picture with the Melocactus, a big, nice population of Melocactus villavistensis. And in these dry environments, it's very common to see some Racinias, in this case, Racinia multiflora. And there's also another Racinia decipiens, variety tomensis. These are very, very common, very similar to Racinia fraseri, which grows in Ecuador, with some slight differences. And once we cross the Andes, we get a little bit into more humid areas. This is I call this the Christie's Bridge, because every time she's been there like 2 or 3 times. She loves this bridge. It's a place that we stop for lunch, and the best part is what you see on the other part of the bridge, so it makes it very accessible. This is the Utcubamba River, and we're going to be traveling on the Utcubamba Valley, and as you can see, it's just full of bromeliads. This bromelia, I don't want to give the name. I've been discussing it with Eric Goda, And I think this is what should be Tillandsia carnosa. And like I said, we are still trying to discuss the names for this. He has a publication on the BSI journal in which I think he might have swapped the names between this one and Ferreira. So anyway, I'm gonna keep the names that are widely available that I've seen on the internet and the Australian group of Bromeliads. So I'm gonna keep this as Tillandsia, most likely Tillandsia carnosa. You can see the inflorescence here. This is a different Tillandsia with the bracts not so developed like in carnosa. The spectacular plant over here is Tillandsia ferreira. In my opinion, Tillandsia ferreira is the one that has the bracts that are this bluish gray color with the flowers very dark purple, as you can see here, and just the detail of the flowers. Again, going back, I think this is Tillandsia carnosa, and I have to check on the books, Lyman books, and look at the original descriptions. Unfortunately, they don't mention the color, which is quite different between the two bromeliads that I just showed. And so we have to go probably by the location, and both of them grow pretty much on the same valley, one more to the north, one more in the south. Anyway, beautiful, beautiful plants. Also on the trees above this river, Tillandsia straminea. This is in one particular location, you're able to see, I think, 6 or 7 Tillandsia. Tillandsia distica, also growing on the trees. Tillandsia hitchcockiana, which is this one here with a long inflorescence. A detail of hitchcockiana. It's not the typical hitchcockiana that you see sometimes in Ecuador. This one is more purple, the other one is more bluish. Pitcairnia paniculata. It's similar to paniculata. I'm not sure if it is actually paniculata. I haven't been able to find the exact name. Pitcairnias echinata, also growing on the side of the river. And some other Pitcairnias unidentified, as you can see here, with some details, and more Pitcairnias. The place is also very rich on orchids. And all along the river, you'll find these trees loaded with bromeliads. Like I said, some straminea over here. This could be most likely Tillandsia carnosa. And again, a lot of cacti grow here. This species of Espostoa was recently named, no more than 10 years ago. It's very localized, just from this location, Espostoa utcumbambensis. The Tillandsia cacticola growing on the trees. And just the detail of the flowers. So once we got in the lower elevation, as we were here, we start climbing up again into the Andes. And we are probably about 10,000 feet in elevation. And at this elevation, it's common to find puyas. Puyas, as you might know, they like to grow at a very high elevation, usually about 8,000 to 9,000 feet. Puya glaucovirens in this case. Here you can appreciate the road. We are going to be coming down on this road all the way down to the Marañón River, which is at the bottom over here. And then in the afternoon, we're going to be going up to Cajamarca on this little road that you see on the other side. It looks more scary than what it is, but it's a spectacular landscape, as you can see. Just details of the Puya glaucovirens flower. And at lower elevation, we start finding, again, Tillandsias and Brisias, Tillandsia curvispica, which is this plant over here. And this is the inflorescence. You can see that it is, the inflorescence is curved, hence the name curvispica. And this very nice thing that you see over here, it took me a long time to find out what it was, is Tillandsia spiraliflora. And I haven't been able to find it in bloom. Beautiful plants. This plant gets to be probably, I'll say almost 2 feet across. Very whitish color on top and very dark underneath the leaves. Beautiful plants. And a very nice population, as you can see, plenty of plants. And it just grows on a little gorge. Now the succulent plant that grows over here, they're fairly common in the Andes, Peperomia, the genus Peperomia. This is probably one of the nicest. They look like little bonsais, probably about 10 inches tall. And we get down to the bottom. So we went from 10,000 feet, and the Marañón River, I think it is probably 700 feet in elevation, 800 feet. So quite a drop to come to this town of Balsas. And it's very, very dry, usually very, very hot. And of course, lots of cacti here. And we start going up on the other side. Here you can appreciate what humans have done to the environment here. So you think that because you are in the mountains, it is untouched, but because of terracing and the way that they work the land, you can see that they created these fields for agricultural purpose mainly. So it is disturbed in some of the areas. And you can see even some flat areas where there's more development and more human activity. And again, this is the road that we were seeing from the other side. Again, looks scary, and sometimes when there is a bus or a truck coming the other way, it gets a little narrow. But we survived 5 times, so I think it is safe to say that it's a safe road. I was surprised to see an Echeveria on my first trip. It was a scouting trip. I forgot the species name. Echeverias are mostly are very common in Mexico. However, there are like I'll say 7 or 8 species between Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina. So there's a few Echeverias that reach South America. And this picture was taken probably 15 years ago. And again, you can see this is sort of like an internet hub over here. So I guess it must be some kind of internet cafe where people could go and communicate. And this was a long time ago, so it made more I was surprised to see this in the middle of nowhere to have internet. There's some people question the validity of this name, and I have researched, and this is right where we are, and I think it is the type location for Vrisia harmsiana. I'm not sure if it has been transferred to Tillandsia, but it is for sure harmsiana. I have a publication which shows exactly the spike. I've only seen it once, and so I'm looking forward to going back again and have more detailed pictures, because literally it was just a snap picture that I took. So as I mentioned before, we've been started from Chiclayo, we came down to the Amazon, to the mountains, and then we are back in the Andes, and we're going to be visiting a little bit the town of Cajamarca, which is the 3rd largest city in Peru. As you can see, it's got a lot of colonial architecture, a lot of colonial influence when the Spaniards were here. The town has been declared a World Heritage Site with very nice colonial features, especially in the downtown area. It's quite nice to walk around. And there's quite a high indigenous people still living on the Andes. And usually you can tell the region where they're from by their hats. So this is a typical hat for Cajamarca. I'm going to show you later some other hats that belong to different parts of the country. Again, out of Cajamarca, we do 2 or 3, we stay for 2 or 3 days. So we go pretty much in all different directions. And again, you can see how the Andes, there's a lot of human influence in the habitat. So a lot of these places have been transformed, and most, you don't see the habitat like they used to be. However, the good thing about the plants, they like to grow in these places that are not very apt for agricultural activities, like in this case, where you find cacti, and you find this beautiful tillandsia. I used to call it Tillandsia macbradiana, which I was corrected, it is Tillandsia guteana. McBradiana is it doesn't pop like this one. It is longer inflorescence, and this one is more compact. You'll see some more detailed pictures of it. And Matucana is a genus that is, I think it is endemic from Peru, because there's no Matucanas in any other countries. Anyway, it has beautiful yellow, orange, or red flowers, and they grow together with the bromeliads that we're looking at. And just some details of the Tillandsia guteana. As you can see, it pops a lot, which McBradiana does not. The inflorescence is quite large and with very long bracts. Beautiful plant. And you can see at different stages when the inflorescence is just coming out, it has a different color or coloration, more reddish or dark pink. Another Tillandsia that is widespread, but not very common. In fact, you really have to search to find Tillandsia humilis, one of the few Tillandsias with yellow flowers. And again, some years you can find it in full bloom, some years you cannot. Tillandsia tectorum also grows on these rocks. Tillandsia tectorum can be the species tectorum is very, very variable. There's even a book that has named, different species for the tectorum or subspecies. Anyway, this is a very nice form with very fine leaves. And another Tillandsia that grows in this area is Tillandsia extensa, also with very fine leaves. This plant is quite large. Again, it's like probably 1.5 to 2 feet in from here to here, so it's quite large. So the inflorescence is also 2 to 3 feet long. And you can see the inflorescence when it's just coming out. It's a fairly large Tillandsia, not very common, but eventually if you walk around, you will find it. And again, another common one, Tillandsia cacticola, widespread. And just the details of the flowers. Very large, whitish flower with the petals with a little bit of lilac color. And just typical architecture in some of these towns. This is Tillandsia cajamarcensis. It can also be found as Tillandsia Dudleyi, which is what I have, and I just corrected the name. The actual name is cajamarcensis. Again, it's not very common. I think I've seen it maybe a couple of times, so you just have to be lucky to find it on some of these trips. We also do a side tour to the east of Cajamarca, mainly to see this beautiful puya. This is a very tight, compact puya, probably, I'll say 5 to 7 inches across. It's got a beautiful inflorescence. As you can see, the valley is right here. This is a little bit of a hill, and this is the place where it likes to grow. It'll be a beautiful puya to have on a little container. And you can see the flowers almost black. And it's interesting that we are 9,000 feet in elevation, and together with the puya, it's unusual to find Pitcairnia pungens. When you go back to the same places year after year, you actually start meeting some of the locals. Like this lady over here, I met her 12 years ago. The girls are now like 20 years old. And so, but it's fun to come back to the places. I think this is then with some of the girls, I actually printed this picture, and on one of my last trips, I actually framed this picture and I gave it to them, and they were very, very happy to have a memory from a few years back. And when I did the scouting trip, I was actually with Kelly Griffin. And Kelly, as you might know, he's into echeverias and dahlias, and we were looking specifically for this echeveria. And I have the book, Pilgrim's book on echeveria, and it says, this echeveria grows on these mountains, but we found it on this fence. And I go, that's kind of weird, like an echeveria. I was thinking like a wire fence, and this is actually a mud fence. And as soon as I look up, Kelly was driving, and I go, there's the echeveria. So it was basically the same plant and the same location that it was described on the book. This is a detail of the flower. And here is when we met this family for the first time. We actually showing the book and the lady, and we asked for a ladder because we needed a ladder. The plants were growing on this fence over here. And she goes, yeah, a couple of gringos came 4 or 5 years ago, and they asked us the same thing, the ladder and the thing to permission to photograph. So anyway, this is what's nice to come back to the same places and meet the people still living there. This is the lady, she's just posing for me sorting the Andean potatoes. So from Cajamarca, which is the town over here, we start going and heading back to the coast, to the town of Trujillo. And again, we'll see some, this tillandsia, it is quite similar to purpurascens. It has, purpurascens is also widespread, so I'm not surprised that it's variable from the typical purpurascens, but as far as I know, that's what I think it is, and it grows in this area as well. And coming down, we also were able to see, I'm sorry, you skipped this picture, Tillandsia limani. Limani is more common in Ecuador, so I was a little surprised when we found it in very, very dry area coming down from high elevation into the coast. And again, we only saw it one time. I've seen the plants before, but then when I saw the inflorescence, I was able to determine that it was limani. And as we start getting down along the coast, you can see that the vegetation gets very, very dry. The coast, it almost gets no precipitation whatsoever. The green that you see over here, it's obviously there is a river, and it gets, most likely this is corn, and it gets, irrigated by the water from the river. But anyway, we spend the night on this coastal town near Trujillo. And of course, we are in the Pacific. We get to see our sunset. And we start the next morning where we start seeing these dunes. And then the first time that I saw these dunes, I was surprised to see some vegetation without knowing what it was. And I just saw some dark spots on the sand. And so once we start exploring, we realized that there were bromeliads, there were tillandsias. Most people, they relate tillandsias to tropical, to wet areas and stuff like that, without thinking that they can grow in full sand, like in this case. It's actually 3 different species growing on the same area. This is Tillandsia latifolia, which is widespread, and it's a plant that can grow in wet areas, dry areas, and anything in between, very variable. A detail of the inflorescence and a detail of the flower. You also find this Tillandsia straminea. And Tillandsia purpurea also grows here with a longer inflorescence. And just more pictures. Oh, Tillandsia weathermani also grows in this dunes. So along the coast, you'll find, I think, 6 or 7 different Tillandsia, depending on the place that you stop. Different species can grow, and some of them, they grow together, like in this case. More of this Tillandsia latifolia. And coming down, we see another population of Tillandsia tectorum, very different from the tectorum that we saw before. As you can see, a lot more compact. And you can see that the leaves are a little thicker than the ones we saw before. And this is in bloom coming down the mountains, probably in about 5,000 feet in elevation. And again, Tillandsia purpurea, growing on the side of the road. This is Puya serratania, around 9,000 feet. With the detail of the flower, one of the few puyas with kind of whitish, creamy flowers, very long, pollinated by hummingbirds. And on the first scouting trip, the main target for me to go over there were these plants over here. I thought this was spectacular without knowing that what I was going to see afterwards. Anyway, this is Puya raymondi. As you can see, it's a population with very young plants. You don't see any inflorescence or anything, and you can see the Cordillera Blanca in the background. More of this plant, Deuteroconia longipetala, which I mentioned before. It is widespread You can almost see it almost every day on the tour. And before getting into our next town, we visit the national park, the Yanganuco, which has a couple of glacial lakes, and it's as you can see, this is a valley created by glaciers, and it's just a place full of bromeliads. I call it Bromelia paradise. I think 5 or 6 species of bromeliads grow here. These are some puyas, which I haven't identified. This is Tillandsia valteri, atypical because it's got the red bracts instead of the yellow bract, which is the typical Tillandsia valteri. It is, however, the same species. Beautiful Masdevallia, beautiful orchids growing over here. Masdevallia amabilis. This is a Tillandsia that grows very, very close to the river. So you can see the river. I've never seen it full develop. In some cases I have, but I haven't been able to identify this nice Tillandsia. This is probably very large, probably like 2 or 3 feet across. And you can see the inflorescence. It could be just purpurescence again, growing in a different habitat, but I'm not sure. And a different Tillandsia that I never seen in bloom, so I don't know what it is, in spite of, there's a few articles on the flora of this national park, but however, there's never any details on the bromeliads. On my first trip, I saw this and I thought, well, that's an introduced proteaceae, and I'm thinking that it was a proteaceae introduced from South Africa. And then doing some research, I discovered that there's quite a few proteaceae growing in South America, Colombia, and Peru mainly, and this is one of them, Oreocalis grandiflora. You can see it looks sort of like a leucospermon, which is a South African plant. And just beautiful scenery where we spend the whole day. On these lakes, there's a couple of lakes. You can see the color, typical for glacial lakes. And you can see the peeling bark on this tree over here belongs to the genus Polylepis. Polylepis is a genus of plants that grow at very high elevation, usually about 8,000–9,000 feet. It's the only tree that grows pretty much above the tree line. And because of that, it's a very important habitat for birds. The main problem is because it's the only tree that grows at this elevation, it's the only source for the indigenous people for using the wood. So in many areas, it is pretty much you can't see any more of these forests of these trees, which it's a big problem for the population of birds that are dependent on the fruit and for nesting and everything. So these national parks are good at protecting these trees. Anyway, we usually go with a group photo on this beautiful park. Passiflora cumbalensis, which is a passion fruit, quite different from the passion fruits that you see, the edible ones. And this is a huge population of Tillandsia purpurescens. And again, this is why I think that the one growing by the river, it might be just one of these plants growing in a different environment. And you can see it's got yellow bracts, but it's got a purple flower, as you can see here. And some of the young plants, they get this very nice color when exposed to full sun. And now the Tillandsia that grows here, it's not very common, but next to the lakes, you find Tillandsia ionochroma. And another puya with the detail of the inflorescence. This is the Puya macrura, grows over here. I used to call it Puya angusta, but then by reading the publications from the park, I realized it is Puya macrura, it's not angusta. And we go, in this particular park, we go all the way up to 12,000 feet. Still beautiful flowers. This is a nice Liliaceae, Bomarea dulcis. And we get a close-up view of the Huascarán mountain over here. On one of the scouting trips, we actually went to the other side, the other range of this valley, which is Cordillera Negra. As you can see, it doesn't have permanent snow, mainly to look for cacti, not too many bromeliads over here. And you can see on the background, the Cordillera Blanca that we just visit with the Huascaran over there. We used to stay in the town of Huaraz, where you can see the mountains from our hotel. And near the town of Huaraz, we do a little bit of scouting, mainly to see another population of Tillandsia tectorum. Kind of a difficult access, you have to climb, and it's not very accessible. When I was young, I was able to climb these hills. I don't do that anymore. And again, yeah, you can see in the first plane, you can see the Tillandsia latifolia, but you can see the valley, very, very agricultural activities, mainly because they have the water from the river. So you can see over, this is a valley that was inhabited by the Incas. So it has been inhabited for many, many years. This is just an unusual branch inflorescence of Valtteri. It's the only one I've seen. I shouldn't even put this picture. Valtteri usually just have like a single, not branch inflorescence. And again, this is on the scouting trip that you can see a few Puya remondis over here, and you really don't know how big these plants are until you're next to them. And we were lucky on several occasions that we were on El Nino event, which is happening this year. So I'm hoping when I go there in August, September, we'll see the same, I can take the same picture. As you can see, I try to match on 5 different trips. I try to match why in some years you got so many plants that are in bloom, and they match exactly the El Nino events. So like I said, I've been there 5 times. 2 years with El Nino event, I was able to see this. So hopefully this year I'm going to be able to corroborate. If I see many plants in bloom, that's when they have this mass flowering. As you can see from the previous year, only 2 plants were in bloom. I have years, and I think I showed some pictures where there's very, very few plants in bloom. As you can see, was a spectacular year with many, many of the plants in bloom. These plants are believed to be 60 to 80 years old, and once the plant blooms, it dies the following year. These are plants that flower the previous year, and this is just a detail of these rosettes. So every single one, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back. Every single one of this little thing is actually this, like a little rosette with about 6 to 12 flowers. And again, we are, I think, at 12 to 13,000 feet. We are very, very high in elevation. You can see a person here to have an idea of how tall these inflorescences are. And we use that time to have a little bit of lunch right next to the plant. So on my scouting trip, I didn't get to this place. I learned about it afterwards. So every time that I go back to exactly the same location. And you can see what the landscape looks like on years that it was, not many plants in flower. You can see that the previous years was a Nino event, and you can see how many plants have flowers from the previous year. So it looks very, very different. And I'm not saying that there's no plants in bloom, but you have to actually walk to get to one of them that is in bloom. And this is just to show this is another location. There's about 23 populations of Puya Raimondi scattered in Peru and 2 in Bolivia. So basically population is just a group, and they're separated from each other, and there's just known 23 locations. And this is all the importance on this plant. I told you that the giant hummingbird was the pollinator, but there's quite a few birds that feed on them, or they use for foraging, or they use for hiding. So it's a very, very important plant at this elevation. Some of the cacti that grow at this elevation, Oroya borchesi, which is a very large cactus with a yellow flower, and another Matucana yangunacensis. As you can see, the the trip combines very well cacti and bromeliads. Another plant at high elevation, Osteocylindropuntia flocosa, with a pollinator on the flower here. So from this high elevation place, we start driving down to Lima from Huaraz, which is the town that we were, to Lima. And as you can see, as we start driving down, the landscape becomes very, very arid because close to the ocean is very cold. So there's not much evaporation and therefore no precipitation. And the habitat is very, very dry. More of this longipetala, Deuteroconia longipetala, and quite a few different species of cacti, Spostoa melanostele, detail more of this longipetala. This is another Echeveria andicola. This is also inland from Lima. I've been there only once, one particular trip. Somebody requested to go to a location to see a cactus, and I have the name of this, Ahaveras zaratensis. It's a very large bromelia that grows both as epiphyte and also next to rivers. Eric Gura gave me another name, so I need to research if what could this be. Beautiful bromelia, just beautiful. And the flora is exquisite. As you can see, some Jason Eraceae, this most likely, I don't know what this will be, and this is a an orchid. And another picture of the Echeveria andicola. So we are all the way down to Lima, and we're going to be going up again. But before that, we do some coastal stops to see Tillandsia latifolia growing in a very different location. As you can see, the plants are quite different. The plants are very developed with very small inflorescences, and the cacti also are quite unique with this arid environment. And we start climbing up again on our way to Cusco. And again, we are at 11 to 12,000 feet, a very beautiful cactus that is called Browningia candelaris. People who are into cactus really appreciate seeing that in habitat. And again, Tillandsia latifolia growing. So you have seen latifolia growing on sand dunes, growing in the jungle, and here going at 11,000 feet. So very, very plastic species. We go through a national park, Los Guanacos, here with some vicunias over here. And what you see over there are, again, some Puya ponderosa. Very unique inflorescence. There's a nice place to stay in between the coast and Cusco. And this place was built by an Italian guy who saw the potential of this place, because a lot of the tourists, they do drive from Lima to Cusco, and this is like a medium place to stop, so he gets a good business here. And once we start getting in those river valleys, we start seeing again more Tillandsias, Tillandsia caulescens. And I'm sorry that is jumping all over. A detail of the flowers and the bracts. The bracts are very, very red, and the flowers are white. Again, this is pollinated by hummingbirds. You can see the tubular flower. Kind of difficult to photograph. In some of these plants, they actually look like Tillandsia ionantha with the colors, like the Mexican species, but it is caulescens. Again, latifolia growing next to the river. So again, very, very variable species. This is the only population that I've seen of Tillandsia cerulea growing in Peru. Unfortunately, there was a landslide, and this thing is no longer there. So I'm unable, you can see it very far in the mountains, but I've been unable to find a location next to the road. And when we do this trip, we usually finish our trip on just a short day to visit Machu Picchu. Sometimes we stay at this very nice place that used to be you can see the train station. And this was purchased by a couple in the 60s or 70s, a couple of Canadians, which fell in love with the place. And she is a painter. There were artists, hippies. And anyway, their son is now running the place, and he has built some additional rooms. The very convenient place, because when we go to Machu Picchu, we wake up very early in the morning, and we need to take the train that usually leaves around 6:15. So it's nice to grab a cup of coffee and just be at the train station without having to hike too much. Anyway, as you can see, the gardens are beautiful. But before we go to Machu Picchu, which I will show some pictures, there's some nice habitat on the other side of the hotel. We usually do a hike the day after Machu Picchu. And there's 3 or 4 species of tillandsias. Tillandsia cauligera. The leaves are very like a paper almost. Very thin. This is the inflorescence on Tillandsia cauligera. We also find Tillandsia palacea, with a little pink lilac flower. Some insects that are quite unique. Tillandsia nana, also found in one little spot. And sometimes I am unable to find it, but it's quite nice to see. And Tillandsia micans also grows in this area with the yellow bracts and the white flower. There's a small Puya densiflora, with green flowers. Again, this Puya is probably no more than 10 inches tall, 12 inches tall with inflorescence. And a very unique Echeveria grows here, Echeveria westi. One of my favorite Echeverias. Very uncommon, you don't never see this in cultivation. So anyway, when we take the train, we arrive to the town of Aguascalientes. As you can see, tons of tourists take the train either from Cusco or from Ollantaytambo, which is the place where we stay at the hotel. And people can enjoy a full day in Machu Picchu. Nowadays, they're very organized. They put a restriction on the number of people that can visit per day. Before you were able to basically wander around all the ruins. Now they have created sort of like circuits. And so even people who are not in good shape, or they want to do something more light, there's a circuit where they can see most of the different attractions of different important points in the city of Machu Picchu. When I do go, I like to go to this is the gate to the city. When I did it in the first time, I was 19 years old, and I did the whole road, the 4 days walking in the mountains to go to Machu Picchu. It's a hike that a lot of people choose to do instead of just taking the train. But anyway, I always like to go back, and that was the first time I saw the whole city was from this area. So when I do it, I try to go. The town of Aguascalientes is here at the bottom. So from here, after taking the train, the people will take a bus. As you can see, this zigzag road that would take you to the entrance. And once you show the entrance, there's bathrooms here, toilets, and you show your ticket, and there you are to explore the city. Beautiful tillandsias growing on the vegetation in the ruins. And of course, different views. And this was myself a few years back when I still have a lot more hair than I do now. But I have the same picture taken when I was 19 years old. So it's nice to go back to places. This is a beautiful orchid that grows in the ruins, among the ruins, Sobralia dichotoma. Sobralias are usually born in white or very light pink. On the walls of the ruins, you can find this tillandsia that was recently described, believe it or not, Tillandsia Machu Picchuensis. Just the detail of the flowers. So now when I go, I usually don't go into the ruins. I just go for like a 4 or 5 hour hike. And it's just nice to hike along the river. Tillandsia fendleri is probably the most common tillandsia here. You'll see it all along the train ride. It is a quite variable species. I think the best or the nicest form is this one that grows here in Cusco, in Machu Picchu. But it grows all the way up to Colombia, and Colombia has kind of boring, very pale yellow bracts. I think this is the nicest one. Nice heliconia grows in this valley, Heliconia subulata. And of course, we have time to explore a little bit of the town of Cusco. Again, when I went there in 1983, 84, Cusco was still very, let's say, unspoiled by tourism, but very run down nowadays. The city is very, very well kept. And as you can see, the main square, the plaza, is well kept and very, very clean. And just a few shots of the this is the cathedral. I'm sorry, this is the Iglesia of San Francisco Church, which is here on the right, and the cathedral is here on the left. Again, the cathedral, as you can see, the square is very, very well kept now. And it has become a very touristy place. And the architecture of all the areas surrounding the plaza is also very, very well kept. It had these typical balconies that you were able to see also in Cajamarca. And I used to take pictures of people. I don't do that anymore. I used to carry the long lens not to bother the people. But anyway, here's a few shots of the local people wearing the different hats. This is a Cajamarca hat, same as this one. This tall one says Cajamarca. This is more from the Andes. As you can see, their skin burned by the high elevation radiation from the sun. There's a lady coming out of the side of the door, laughing. I think it was somebody getting married, and she was just being curious about it. This is a typical hat from Cusco. They usually have something attached to the side, as you can see here on this girl. And that's it. Before I finish, I just like to always mention what I'll be doing as far as trips. We have an upcoming trip in July to Ecuador, which is actually full. It's sold out. I think Christy is coming. I'm not sure if any other member. Dylan is coming also on this. And I'll be coming back to Peru in 2023, in August 2023, September. Again, Argentina, Chile, mainly for cacti, but there's actually a few tillandsias that grow in northern Argentina. And then Socotra, this island in the Indian Ocean, that it was basically belongs to Yemen, but there's direct flights from the Emirates from Abu Dhabi nowadays. We also have a trip to Namibia in May, and we'll be going back to Brazil in July of 2024, mainly to look at bromeliads. And I'd like to thank you all. Sorry about the things skipping here. Like I said, I'm not very good with the Zoom presentations, but I hope you enjoy it.